at number 10, Justice Riders. You know what sells? Cowboys, baby. Taking your characters and plopping them in a western setting is always a guaranteed money-making tactic. Sure, it's been done a million times, but in 1997, DC released Justice Riders, or in other words, a western Justice League composed of hootin' and hollerin' versions of Wonder Woman, Hawkman, Kid Flash, Martian Manhunter, Booster Gold, and Blue Beetle, which is just the weirdest arrangement for a Justice League ever, but it's so cool. It's just wild. Obviously, to make the setting work, all the abilities of these heroes are turned way down, but in place of that, we got a quick drawing Martian Manhunter in a poncho and a big old hat, and Blue Beetle as a wacky scientist. It's super cool. With all the style you might expect, the story is just as wild as the Wild West it takes place in. It follows Sheriff Diana Prince as she puts together this team of heroes to take on Maxwell Lord, who left her town as a smoking stack of ruins. It's just a fun time and absolutely deserves a read from you. Number 9, Batman Dracula. Some of the coolest stories involve Batman, and I mean, let's be honest, Batman himself is one of the coolest heroes. He's also the most human, literally just being a regular human who fights among gods and aliens against some of the biggest threats to humanity, including vampires. And when he goes up against the baddest and biggest vampire, Dracula himself, Batman becomes more than a man. He becomes the most justice-driven, terrifying vampire you've ever seen, and it is dope. When Dracula comes to Gotham, a good vampire grants Batman the vampiric gift in order to take on Dracula himself, and the idea was so awesome that it became a whole trilogy, starting with Red Rain, then Bloodstorm, and ending in Crimson Mist, all of which put the most obvious hero to become a vampire in one of the best Victorian horror styles and with the most terrifying looks I have ever seen for the Dark Knight. Batman Dracula is truly one of the best versions of Batman ever, and 'tis all thanks to Elseworlds. Number 8, Green Lantern Earth 1. This Green Lantern focused story is one that I actually really like. It brushes over a lot of things very easily, but it made me care about the Green Lanterns, and that's something I didn't think was gonna happen. I don't really care about them normally, but in this one I do. It almost feels like a dark sci-fi take on Hal Jordan and the Green Lanterns. Essentially, in this story, Hal Jordan is on the moon with a crew of workers who mine for metal when he comes across a crashed alien ship containing the Green Lantern ring, a Green Lantern battery, the corpse of Abin Sur, and a robot called a Manhunter. Hal claimed the ring, just taking it off the alien corpse, and used it to fight the Manhunter that sprung on him. What had happened is that the Manhunter robots were created by the Guardians of the Universe to take out the Green Lanterns as the Lanterns had grown uncontrollable, and they were pretty successful, but also grew out of control, putting the galaxy in peril and leaving the Green Lantern core broken and spread extremely thin. Hal meets up with an equally inexperienced Kilowag, and they go across the universe trying to rally together any Green Lanterns they can. The best way I saw it described was as if Christopher Nolan and Ridley Scott teamed up and made a Green Lantern story. It feels like that, and it's just such a cool and fresh story. You should definitely check it out. Hey you nerds! I hope you're enjoying this video, but if you are, make sure you hit the like button so that we know that this is what you want to see and we can make more of it. Cool? Okay, cool. Moving on. Number 7, Justice League The Nail. This one is rather odd. It's kind of a Superman story, but without Superman. The premise is that the day that Kal-El crashed on Earth, the Kents drove over a nail and it gave them a flat tire, resulting in Superman just never becoming a thing. And it's all based off a little poem. The poem goes like this: For want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For want of a shoe, the horse was lost. For want of a horse, the rider was lost. For want of a rider, the message was lost. For want of a message, the battle was lost. And for want of a battle, the kingdom was lost. And all for the want of a nail. So essentially it's all about the butterfly effect, which is kind of what Elseworlds is all about in the first place when you really think about it. Wow, look at that, so cool. So, in this story, all the other heroes are here, but without that one central figure to embody their core values. Without that main leader, the world actually fears the Justice League. The world is constantly standing against them, and the story shows how they struggle with not only the villains of the DC universe, but even their own public perception, and it's all because Superman is out of the picture. As much as it feels like a big testament to Superman's importance, it does also show the strength of the other members of the League to a degree, which is nice because Superman is just kind of boring. Number 6, Luthor. But do you know what isn't boring? Lex Luthor's view of Superman, and that's what leads me to our next pick. Luthor is a brilliant inversion of the normal Superman story we are all used to. In this story, we get to see Metropolis, Superman, and the rest of the world through the eyes of Lex Luthor. And from his point of view, Superman is utterly terrifying. He's a menace that could destroy the world and the world Luthor has built beneath his burning alien gaze. It flips the whole thing on its head, and while it's relatively short, it does a lot in that small time, showing us the lengths to which Lex Luthor is willing to go to achieve his ideals, but it also tells pretty plainly why he would go to those lengths in the first place. This comic inspired the insanely good Joker story that is this one's spiritual successor, and for that alone, it definitely deserves praise. It's just nice to see a story from a perspective different to the everyday superhero story. Coming in at number 5 is Gotham by Gaslight. Gotham by Gaslight, like most Elseworld stories, is just super freaking cool. It's such an obvious, brilliant concept. You take Batman, the greatest detective ever, and you plop him in the Victorian era and have him take on one of the most compelling unsolved serial killer cases in history, Jack the Ripper. But then, they go and make it even cooler by having Jack move to this really awesome Victorian Gotham City, and they give Batman and the Ripper a personal connection. The story even sees Bruce accused of being the killer himself, which adds yet another layer on top of everything else. Also, we have to talk about the incredibly cool art style in the comic, which came from Mike Mignola, who created Hellboy, and it just works perfectly in his Victorian setting. It's actually just a big old treat to read. Gotham by Gaslight was one of DC's most successful Elseworld stories, and it even got a 2018 animated adaptation, but it has a completely different ending. Both versions are really cool and really entertaining, so just pick one. Number 4, Superman Red Sun. Probably one of the most beloved Superman stories ever. This story asks the question of what would happen if Kal-El had landed not in Kansas, but in the Soviet Union. Superman grows under the ideals of communism and is used by the Soviets as their weapon, helping bring almost the whole world into a super Soviet Union. It sees other heroic characters like Wonder Woman and Batman in this completely different world and really plays with the idea of freedom over security. It paints this Superman in a much darker light, as he will go to incredibly surprising lengths to achieve his goal of Soviet domination. He goes up against a Lex Luthor who becomes president of the United States, has Brainiac as a supercomputer assistant who eventually turns on him, and the end of the whole story? It's a truly mind-boggling experience to say the least. Also, just like Gotham by Gaslight, in 2020 we got an animated version of this story as well, and it's incredible. Oh, and fun fact, Superman Red Sun is real-life Superman Henry Cavill's favorite Superman story, which is really interesting. Like, could you imagine a Henry Cavill Superman Red Sun live-action movie? Number 3, Kingdom Come. While a lot of the great Elseworld stories deal with versions of specific characters, others deal with the whole DC universe of heroes and villains, and Kingdom Come is probably one of the best of them. Here, the classic heroes who made up the Justice League, they've all basically retired. New heroes have sprung up in their place, but they don't hold a candle to those who came before. They barely even care about saving people and cause a massive accident that takes out almost all of the Midwest of America. Superman has been convinced that the world wanted him to step down. Batman keeps Gotham in control using massive, powerful robots. Green Lantern sits in an emerald fortress above the earth just watching. The Flash has basically become the Speed Force and keeps his city safe by basically being everywhere all at once, existing in the time between seconds. It's almost as if the Justice League had retired and then all the corrupt heroes from the boys took their place, and then the retired heroes come back to correct everything. There's a lot more to it than that, with some really cool stuff going on in all different kinds of places. Kingdom Come is like a love letter to DC Comics by DC Comics, and it has some of the most beautiful comic book art you've ever seen. Coming in at number 2 is The Dark Knight Returns. Technically speaking, Elseworld stories simply have to take place outside the normal DC continuity for them to count as Elseworld stories, or they have to have that little watermark thing on it, but I'm changing the rules here. Which means that Frank Miller's globally appraised The Dark Knight Returns is an Elseworld story, and that makes it one of the best ones. Set in the 80s, it actually tells the tale of an old, grizzled, militaristic Batman who comes out of retirement in the face of an American government that has become more and more dictatorial. He takes on a new Robin, he faces off against an old sadistic Joker, and Bats beats the absolute snot out of Superman in one of the most famous comic book fights ever. The unique style of the comic also just adds another layer to this work of art. Sure, the books that followed were kind of horrible in my opinion in comparison and extremely odd, but the one that came first has a special place in so many people's hearts, and for good reason. And finally, in at number 1, The New Frontier. Most Elseworlds stories give us a world with some radical difference, usually that leaves the world worse for wear. Usually the horror of those worlds gives justifications for why heroes must become stronger, go to greater lengths, or show the fullest extent of their might in ways impossible when restricted by the regular DC canon. But in The New Frontier, we get a world that challenges the heroes to do good in a moral sense, to reach the fullest extent of their hopes and ideals rather than their physical limits, and all without losing track of what makes a story just so freaking good. It's a story about heroes who are worthy of being called that, who inhabit a world that wants so desperately to change for the better. It depicts the DC universe during a post-Korean War era with superheroes outlawed by the government. It's also the beginning of the space age, which leads to the story being told from the perspectives of Hal Jordan and Martian Manhunter. Fans of Elseworlds think of this one as the most perfect. Each subplot is just as unique as the main story, and the characters are all fully realized with different arcs. It also gives a beautiful theme. The story is just about leaving behind a dark past and looking to the bright future. And like all the other great Elseworlds, there's also a movie, so you don't really have to actually read anything, which is always a good time.
Number 10. The Reaching Hand. The amount of bizarre deaths Jimmy Olsen has to suffer in alternate realities, my goodness. In this story featured in the Elseworlds 80-page giant from 1999, we see Bruce Wayne acting as a Lovecraftian detective aiming to unravel the mystery that is the alleged murder of a elongated man. In reality, something far more dark and sinister has taken hold of the hero and is using him as its vessel to spread darkness throughout the city and take hold of other innocent souls. It reminds me a bit of the bizarre and campy 90s film Cast a Deadly Spell. Like most Lovecraft-inspired horror stories, this one ends with a foreboding cliffhanger. That face. I love that face. Bruce Wayne's face at the end, he's like, what will happen? You're dead. You're gonna die. It's not gonna be good. Number 9. Teen Titans The Lost Annual. This strange story has a campy 60s feel to it. It was originally slated to be released in the early 2000s as an Elseworld special for Teen Titans, but was later delayed. In the end, it was released in 2008, where it would be referred to in the title as a Lost Annual. But originally, it was intended to be an Elseworld special, so I'm gonna count it. Here, the Teen Titans team up to try and save President John F. Kennedy, who has been kidnapped by space aliens and replaced by some kind of double. The whole adventure is pretty wacky, which honestly is what makes it so enjoyable. You know me, I love wacky adventures. Reminds me a bit of an original series Star Trek episode. And in case you haven't gathered by now, TOS is my favorite of the Star Treks, so yes. Although I am finally watching Discovery now, so I guess we'll see what happens. And before we move on to our number 8 spot, a quick thank you to all of you for joining me this list, and a reminder to click that like if you want more videos like this one. I personally love exploring Elseworlds with you, so I'd love to do more about it. Number 8. Elseworld's Finest, Supergirl and Batgirl. This one is kinda ridiculous, but also has some pretty powerful and epic moments. In this Elseworld story, both Superman and Batman do not exist. Kal-El was destroyed before he could become Superman, though Kara Zor-El still made it to Earth. She took his place as Metropolis's hero, becoming Supergirl. Bruce Wayne never became Batman either, and instead Barbara Gordon guards Gotham as Batgirl, after her parents were murdered by accident instead of the Waynes, who were meant to be targeted. The two women join forces and take on a very sneaky Lex Luthor, who Supergirl had thought of as a close friend and ally initially, and a very jacked Joker. He's like really jacked, like more jacked than you could probably imagine. He's also wearing like a little gym outfit, which is just something. Number 7. A Nation Divided. This Elseworld comic, Superman: A Nation Divided, gives us a look at what Superman would be like if he was around during the Civil War and happened to be a Union soldier. In this story, Superman is known as Atticus Kent and ends up finding out he has superpowers during the Civil War. He quickly becomes the Union's new secret weapon and even takes both Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln on a little flight to give them a tour of the Capitol. I personally love when history and comics meld, and Elseworld stories that posit what if superheroes were real and part of historical events. So for me, this was an interesting story and one that I enjoyed. The whole story is told through letters of various historical figures as well as Kent himself. Number 6. Thrill Killer. Set in the 60s, this Elseworld Stories follows a doomed Barbara Gordon and Dick Grayson, aka Richard Grey Stark, which is his actual name here. Although he still goes by Dick Grayson because comics. These two attempt to take on the Joker, who in this world is a woman known as Bianca Steeplechase. In the end, Robin is killed, but so seemingly is the Joker. Oddly enough, in this reality, it's actually Batwoman and Robin who end up inspiring Bruce Wayne to join them. He becomes Batman after Dick's demise. Barbara is also the one with the wealth in this Elseworld story. She is an heiress who became somewhat estranged from her father after the unsolvable murder of her mother. Barbara uses her wealth to purchase Wayne Manor, as in this reality, the Waynes actually lost their fortune during the Great Depression. Very period of them. Very period to lose all of your money during the Great Depression. Or now, during the Now Depression. Number 5. Red Rain. Red Rain has to be one of my all-time favorite Elseworlds tales. It also was an ongoing story that was told over the course of multiple graphic novels released throughout the 90s. In this story, Batman battles vampires but eventually succumbs to them when he is bitten and transformed himself into one of the creatures of the night. He still battles with his new monstrous nature, however, attempting to rebel against it. However, eventually the Joker pushes him too far, causing him to give into temptation and drink his foe's blood. I also like how this is rebel. This is like, get off my lawn, kids. I don't know why I do this when I say rebel. Batman attempts to make sure the Joker will never rise again as a vampire, but eventually it is revealed that he was somehow unsuccessful in preventing this from happening when we revisit this alternate Earth much later down the road. Fans of vampires are sure to also enjoy this world, but as a Batman fan, I also just love the extra layer of moral struggle that vampirism gives Batman. Number 4. Earth 3. Earth 3 is home to the Crime Syndicate, an alternate reality where instead of the Justice League members being heroes, they're villains, and instead of the Justice League, we have the Crime Syndicate. In the place of Wonder Woman on the team, we have Superwoman, an evil version of Lois Lane armed with her lasso of submission. Although I always like to think of it as a whip of submission, but that's not. That's something else. You guys can cut that. That might be too kinky. I don't know. I don't know if it's too kinky. You tell me, internet. You tell me. The heroes of this alternate Earth favor strength above all, and as such only seek to dominate and rule those who they consider to be weaker than them. The Crime Syndicate themselves are composed of members Deathstorm, Owlman, Superwoman, and Ultraman currently, but evil versions of Aquaman, known on this alternate Earth as Sea King, and the Flash, known here as Johnny Quick, were also part of the team at a time. I miss Johnny Quick. R.I.P. Johnny Quick. You dead. Number 3. Elseworlds Finest. I mostly love this story for the art, to be honest. Elseworlds Finest is quite different from the previous story we had with no Superman or Batman, with Supergirl and Batgirl respectively taking their place. This title of this story and two-part limited series was initially based on the old comic series World's Finest, which featured the two heroes of Superman and Batman teaming up on the regular. Basically, it's their long-lasting BFF comic. In Elseworlds Finest, we see the heroes team up to go on an Indiana Jones style adventure, with Bruce rocking some pretty sweet supernatural and mystical armor. The two must work together to face an evil Russian Lex and defeat the villainous Ra's al Ghul in order to save the world and free Lana Lang's father. Number 2. Red Sun. One of the most intriguing Elseworlds when it comes to Superman, and in my opinion Lex Luthor for any Lex fans out there, is Red Sun. Red Sun comes to us from the Elseworlds imprint and aims to answer the question, what if Superman had been raised in the Soviet Union? The result is we get a passionate communist Superman who, instead of standing for truth, justice, and the American way, stands for socialism, Stalin, and acts as a champion of the common worker. Instead of an S on his chest, he wears the symbol of communism, the hammer and sickle. Red Sun was a story written by Mark Miller, which offered us a different look at Lex Luthor as well, who became the president and sort of the hero of the USA, all as a part of his greater plan to satiate his obsession with destroying Superman. So in a weird way, Lex becomes sort of part hero as well as the recognizable part paranoid villain that we've all come to know and love. Number 1. Earth 1. Also known as Earth 1 with the number instead of the letters, so Earth 1 or Earth 1. But it's also confusing because there's multiple Earth 1s. When it comes to some of the DC Multiverse, it can actually just get a little confusing in general, as of course there are various Earths that have the same number depending on the continuity we're talking about, New Earth or Prime Earth, not to be confused as well with Earth Prime, Yeah, it can get pretty mathy up in your brain if you're trying to keep track of everything and separate it. But this time around, when I'm talking about alternate Earths when it comes to the number 1, I'm talking about Earth 1, where all of our heroes are just starting out as seen in the Earth 1 series, like Batman Earth 1, Superman Earth 1, Wonder Woman Earth 1. You get the idea. There's a lot of Earth 1s. I like how I didn't talk about how it was interesting at all, I just talked about how it was confusing. Anyways, if you've read Earth 1 or any of those series, you know what I'm talking about. It's awesome. Enough said, apparently. Number 10, Superman Jr. is no more! Exclamation point. Remember that time that Superman Jr. quit? No? Well, you can if you read this Elseworld story. This is another Elseworld story out of the Elseworlds 80-page giant from the 90s. Seriously, this book is chock full of interesting and strange stories. In this one, Superman Jr. ends up quitting the superheroic game, much to Batman Jr.'s dismay, believing his dad will be around forever, so he's not needed. He's like, I quit, I'm over this. My dad's got this for life, for longer than life. I think you know where this is going next. Superman appears to die while taking a net full of dangerous missiles to safety in the emptiness of space to explode in. Supes Jr. then feels terrible, misses his dad, the whole world goes into a tizzy, and eventually Superman Jr. is inspired to return. I don't know if people use the word tizzy anymore, but I just did, so there you go. I'm making it a thing again. He helps Batman Jr. save some guys from an earthquake where they end up being trapped under tons of rock and snow. In the end, however, it's revealed that Superman faked his death in order to influence his son to return to his job as a hero, and everyone has a good laugh about it. Ha 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 ha! Oh, faking your death is such good fun. This story also features such amazing lines as Batguy/Bat Jr. I kid you not, he is called Batguy in this comic, asking Supes Jr. what's the true poop on this? And Superman Jr. responding with a rhyme. Rhyming on your father's grave, Superman Jr.? How distasteful. Number 9, DMT's rockumentary, The Lex Records Story. How about a story where we get the history of how Lex became the head of the most successful record label ever, representing all kinds of superheroic musician talent, and how he ended up selling the label to Darkseid. That is another story which comes to us from the Elseworld 80-page giant, and it is a delight. I promise I'm gonna have other stories that are not from this comic, but just let me get these out of the way, my friends. They're just so good. What a strange story this is. One wherein Superman is part of a superheroic Beetle-like group with Barry Allen, Green Arrow, and Aquaman. Oh, and he's the John Lennon of the group who is tragically killed. And I never knew I needed to see Martian Manhunter as a rock star, but I definitely did need that, and so do you. And before I move on to our number 8, if you are enjoying this list, be sure to let us know and show it by giving this video a thumbs up. It really does help us out here at Top 10 Nerd. Number 8, Superman/Batman. Absolute power! This comic is an interesting one. We are talking about a world in this story arc where Superman and Batman were reimagined as the only heroes. Both of their parents were wiped out at a young age, and Superman was never raised by the Kents. Instead, they were taken in and raised by Saturn Queen, Lightning Lord, and Cosmic King of the Legion of Supervillains. They created a fascist world which they collectively ruled with an iron fist, eliminating any and all opposing heroes who rose up or attempted to do so anyways. If you don't believe me, just look at the end of the first issue in this arc, which ends with Wonder Woman awakening and recruiting Uncle Sam. Yep, that's just how this story do. Number 7, Son of Superman. The 1999 Son of Superman tells a story where John Kent works alongside a group called the Supermen to discover the truth behind what really happened to his father, all as he's realizing just who his father really was, which his mom, Lois Lane, kept a secret, and as he's just realizing himself that he has superpowers. He doesn't even initially realize that Clark Kent and Superman were the same person, but initially instead suspects his mother was having an affair with the costumed hero Superman. Oh boy, John. In the end, they discovered that his father is still alive and had been kidnapped and held prisoner all these years by Lex Luthor with help from Martian Manhunter. Ooh, it does not look good on you, Martian Manhunter. It's not very nice. In the end, this plot is revealed, and despite John being new to heroics, he goes up against Lex, and the good guys end up prevailing. My favorite part, admittedly, is when John calls Lex's ponytail outdated. So 90s. Just gotta love that. Also, I just love that Lex has a ponytail in this. I also just love that this story ends with most of the older crew of Supes retiring, paving the way for a new era of supers like John himself. For me, Elseworld stories that end like this, I'm like, I wish this could be the way of DC. Just let some of these people retire. Let's get some fresh blood in here. We've got a lot of sons and daughters and such. Number 6. Batman in Darkest Night. All my Tales of the Dark multiverse fans out there are likely already familiar with this story, if not the original telling of it, then at least the dark retelling of it. You might know the version of Bruce Wayne from Earth -32, but for this multiverse story, we're talking about the version of Bruce that inspired him from the non-dark Earth, just Earth 32. No negatives needed. This version of Bruce is introduced to us in Batman in Darkest Night, a 90s comic that gave us an alternate story, one where Bruce Wayne, instead of becoming Batman, becomes the Green Lantern in Hal Jordan's place, being chosen by Abin Sur instead. In this reality, Sinestro becomes Green Lantern, Bruce Wayne's biggest foe, and the Joker never existed, as Green Lantern prevents the accident which created him at Ace Chemicals. Here, Catwoman is also Star Sapphire, which I honestly just need more artwork in my life of that whole thing. I'm just like, more Catwoman Star Sapphire artwork, please. Give it to me. Number 5. Batman / Captain America. This has got to be one of my favorite stories out there. It's the team up we've all been waiting for, Batman and Captain America together. I actually love when these two team up. Here we see them taking on each other's main nemesis, featuring Cap's Red Skull and Bat's Joker. There is also a bit of a sidekick swap where Cap partners with Robin and Batman partners with Bucky, and in the end, of course, even Joker admits that Red Skull is so evil, even he is not interested in working with him. He may be a criminal lunatic, but he is an American criminal lunatic. When it comes to German World War II soldiers, even Joker isn't interested in crossing that line. And in the end, he and Red Skull end up squaring off themselves and fighting one another as well, after Joker finds out Red Skull's true allegiance. I just love the Joker's like, I might be crazy, but like, this is too crazy for me. Not about that. Number 4. Batman / Houdini, The Devil's Workshop. For all my Gotham by Gaslight fans out there, here's another stylistically appealing Elseworld story for you. This one evokes the feel of watercolors and also has some really pretty letters. It's really pretty to look at and features Batman teaming up with Houdini to fight vampires. What more could you want, I ask you? It also gives us a cool alternate Joker with Mad Jack Schadenfreude. The art is truly so good here, I must share with you the names responsible. Howard Chaykin and John Francis Moore are the writers, with art by Mark Chiarello and letters by Ken Bruzenak. Just a stunning read. You gotta check it out. Number 3. DC The New Frontier. Not only is this a beautiful world to get lost in, it is super stylized by the late and great Darwin Cook, who passed away in 2016. This Elseworld story paints our heroes as outlaws operating in the post-Korean War time period, where space is truly the new frontier. And being that it is, the story here is primarily led by protagonists and heroes Martian Manhunter and Hal Jordan. Also, I just gotta say, I love when Martian Manhunter gets to be like the main protagonist in a story. I feel like we don't hear enough from him usually. Maybe I just need to read more of his standalone series. Maybe that's what I need to do. The art style is simple and classic, and I also just really love the explosive use of color as well. It's a visually compelling series that I highly recommend checking out. Number 2. Earth 2. Earth 2 is home to many awesome heroes like Val-Zod, Superman, Power Girl, and Helena Wayne's Huntress. It is home to the superhero team known as the Wonders of the World, and while some of the original team is gone, we are introduced to new team members who take their place. And hey, we still got the golden oldie Alan Scott. I personally am just a big fan of both Power Girl and Helena Wayne and their team ups together, so Earth 2 for me, when it comes to alternate realities and worlds and their stories, has got to be one of my favorites personally. Number 1. Kingdom Come. Kingdom Come has to be one of the most beautiful Elseworld stories that takes us to an alternate future where there is a great divide and sort of war in the superhero community, following Superman's choice to retire. He does end up returning to the world of heroics at the behest of Diana, aka Wonder Woman. Kingdom Come was a story originally written by Mark Waid in response to a rise of anti-heroes in the comic world. And in the story, this is exactly what you see some of the classic heroes like Superman, Wonder Woman, and Alan Scott go up against. These new heroes whose ideologies are much more harsh and violent by comparison. Much more edgy. The artwork, of course, is done by one of the most amazing artists to this day in the biz, Alex Ross, and is all hand painted. We also get to end it with, of course, Superman and Diana becoming parents of like a cool baby, and then also they're like, hey Batman, you wanna also help us raise this super baby? I just love that. I love the three of them like parenting together. I think that's adorable.